Good afternoon. I'm Yomika Bennett, Executive Director of the New York Charter Schools Association. Welcome to our weekly webinar. I'm joined today by Susie Carello, Executive Director of the SUNY Charter Schools Institute, David Frank, Executive Director of the Charter Schools Office at NYSID, Angeli Matos, Executive Director in Policy and Operations at New York City Department of Education, as well as Aaron Cochran, Managing Director in the same office, and Corey Callahan from the New York City Charter Center. Today's webinar will follow the same format as in the past. We will begin by hearing from authorizers, fielding questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Then we will transition to New York City DOE topics and questions. But before we get started, before we turn to our panelists, I do want to take some time to update you and just discuss the news many of you have likely heard about Governor Cuomo's recent announcements on cuts to state aid. First, be aware that you should still expect your typical May 1st payments later this week. These payments are for the 2020 fiscal year and should be processed as normal. In addition, the $24.9 million supplemental funding will be paid to New York City charter schools as expected, but I won't steal New York City DOE's or David's thunder on either of that. So, but I will start with the announcement by the Division of the Budget on the budget deficit. As you might recall, the 2021 enacted budget that was passed earlier this month gave the Division of Budget, DOB, the power to cut state aid if there isn't enough money to make payments that are due. If there isn't enough money, DOB will develop a plan for cuts and send the plan to the legislature for review. The legislature then has 10 days to approve the plan or develop their own plan. DOB will review finances during three periods this year. The first period being April 1st to April 30th. The second period is May 1st to June 30th. And the third period is July 1st to December 31st. DOB just recently conducted the review for the first period and released an updated financial plan on Saturday. And that plan shows that the state is facing a $13.3 billion deficit. The updated financial plan calls for an $8.2 billion reduction in aid to localities, which includes state aid to local governments, healthcare organizations, schools, and nonprofits. The plan does not lay out what areas or programs will be cut or by how much. So there are no details on what the impact will be for schools yet, and that for that matter, or any other groups, which means no one can plan right now based on actual numbers. DOB says it will provide more information in May, and based on that information, from the Q&A following the governor's briefing on Sunday, DOB will have more specific numbers, and actually by May 1st, by May 15th, DOB intends to submit the actual plan for cuts to the legislature. The legislature will have, again, 10 days to approve the plan or to develop their own plan. There are a couple important things to consider as we wait for the DOB to release its plan. The amount of deductions will depend on what is included or excluded as far as cuts. It's a good bet that healthcare spending will not see severe cuts, especially if the organization or program supported by that funding is closely related to COVID services. However, cuts can be shall be either equal across the board, so all programs get cut by the same amount, or DOB can cut spending based on a particular appropriation. So we will stay tuned for that. The cuts can be avoided or minimized if federal aid is given to New York or if tax receipts rebound faster than anticipated. There is increasing talk of reopening the economy. Those tax receipts from businesses are critical for state aid payments. But public health is paramount, and that fact must be weighed against reopening plans. Many of us, we have all on this call, I'm sure, have lost colleagues, teachers, staff, loved ones, friends, and family. It has truly been heartbreaking. Thoughtful and deliberate actions are needed, certainly, to get through this. So we want to make sure, as we're advocating for more state aid, more funding to protect schools, to protect children, to protect education, that we are mindful of the public health balance and that we hold officials to account on that as well. Okay, so having said that, and I will say to you very honestly, that was tough. This week has been a number of deaths, so it's really tough. The governor has called for unrestricted federal aid to the state and to alleviate the state's cash problem. So more federal aid can help fix the budget gap and eliminate and minimize any of those cuts. The federal government can have a deficit budget and spend more money than it has on hand. New York State cannot. It's required to have a balanced budget, which is why we'd have to have the cuts at this point. If you have not already, I do encourage you to visit our Action Center on our website and use the tools to advocate for your good schools. So this is going back to what I was saying before. We certainly need to balance public health with the need to get state revenues or funding available to support schools and all of our other programs, local governments, et cetera. We need to reach out to our elected officials to do that. I recommend that highly. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We need to educate state and local elected officials about the work you're doing for your children in your schools, especially during the crisis, and advocate as well, right, to show them the need to avoid the cuts. Assembly Speaker Hasty has put out a statement to call for more federal aid. That was one of his responses to this announcement by DOB. Senator Stewart Cousins stated that she did not want to balance the budget on the backs of students or the state's most vulnerable communities. So those are two important sort of data points to note where the leaders in each house are. That lends itself to the possibility that they will be developing their own plans should DOB present a plan that they don't 100% agree with. I don't want to forget that we need to educate congressional members as well on the importance of federal aid to New York. We need the help. The state is facing an economic crisis. People across the state are facing personal health and financial crises. Our children are witness to all of that and are only remotely connected to their education, which will be the basis for their future long after this terrible crisis is over, as we all know. It is important somehow to implore governors and members of the legislature to hold sight of that. We need this. If the state aid is not there to support our students when schools reopen, we will have failed them in more ways than one. For our part, we will be sharing an advocacy plan when we have more information on numbers from DOB. In the meantime, you should do some groundwork and let your local legislators know the good work, the important work that is happening with your students and in your schools, even if it's online, right? The governor has kind of poo-pooed the remote learning. It's what we have. It's the lifeline for many of our students, for our families. It connects us. It keeps us together. It keeps people involved in what's going on in the world, and it gives our students, again, that lifeline to education, to their teachers, to their schools, which is important to their lives. So we will be sharing an advocacy plan. In the meantime, let your local legislators know what's happening. The first time they hear from you should not be to stave off cuts. Contact them now. Contact them again. Write, call, email, text, Facebook, Instagram, Zoom, Chat, whatever you have. Please reach out. Let them know. Use our Action Center. We have an Action Center on our website. There are tools there, to reach out to members, write, tell them what's going on. Send us information so that we can help advocate. Whatever lines of communication you may have already with your local elected officials, keep it up and start sending the information. Get word to them on the importance of the state aid, to the work that you do, and what it means to our students and our families. We will post on our website the plan the updated financial plan that DOB has released. You should see in the chat links now the link to our Action Center. So I'll move on now to the next announcement, which was the governor's announcement on reopening. Over the weekend, Governor Cuomo announced a phased reopening plan that will be implemented on a regional basis. While schools and most businesses will remain closed through May 15th, manufacturing and construction businesses will begin to reopen. They will be required to have protective measures for consumers and employees. That's important because that gives us, a view into what the new normal that might come for anybody or for what the state will be looking at in terms of reopening. While schools and most businesses will remain closed, like I said, through May 15th, we should be thinking about what will be needed for reopening. Again, those protective measures for consumers, in our case, right, our students, staff, et cetera, vendors as well. Following the first phase, the next phase of openings for other low-risk businesses will begin as long as there has been 14 days of decline in hospitalizations since the start of phase one. So phase one is manufacturing and construction businesses. 14 days passes, we continue to decline. Then we'll have phase two, and that will be the low-risk businesses. The governor did announce today that he appointed a task force, a working group, to study the reopening, what he's calling the unpause that will happen after May 15th. Again, the opens will be regionally based, and they'll be tailored to avoid drawing people outside of one region into another. The examples that were given were avoiding opening parks or beaches in one area that draws people from outside the region to visit. According to the governor's statements, decisions on schools will be made in coordination with the opening of transportation systems, parks, beaches, and other businesses. And more importantly, that a decision on opening schools will be made at the end of this week. The governor did add not just schools, he said schools and summer schools. So we'll have to wait and see what that means when he makes that decision and announces it later this week. As I said, the governor mentioned a couple times that remote learning is not a substitute for classroom instruction, that we've all been thrust into it and without time to prepare. But he's clearly looking at, lessons learned. So as the state is looking at lessons learned and how to come back in a better position than we were before, what the governor calls, what he refers to as reimagining a new New York. So what we can see from that, right, is the opportunities. There are opportunities for improvement. The state's going to take a look at that. We as a charter community should do the same thing. All of us are living and working under conditions we never thought we would find ourselves in. We're learning new ways to conduct our lives, our work, and most importantly for what schools and families, we're learning how to educate children in a different way. So looking forward, we need to take stock of those lessons learned for ourselves, right, within our charter community, so that we can inform ourselves and our stakeholders and policymakers and decision makers. We need to take a hard look at what the new normal will be for our organizations and how that will shape education and the future of our students, of our work. There will be challenges, that's no doubt. We also have to take the opportunity to make improvements for the better. Our new normal can be better than before the crisis. The New York Charter School Association has started pivoting some of our focus toward reopening. We're looking at lessons learned, educating in the new normal. Our partners on the webinar today have also begun to look at these topics. I will be asking you for suggestions on what specific topics you want us to focus on, want to learn more about, want to share with other schools, and how to advocate and what to advocate for. This will be an ongoing and iterative process. Stay tuned, and yes, look out for more of my emails. Okay, with that said, thank you for indulging me. Thank you for letting me go through these updates. If you have any questions, please send them in the chat right now, send me an email later, or as many as you do, feel free, as always, to give me a call. And with that update, we will turn now to David, Susie, and Aaron for their updates. David, would you like to start? You're muted.
Thanks, Yamika. That's a tough act to follow and important information. I would just say the governor didn't poo-poo online learning, but rather talked about how it's a necessary aspect of our lives right now. But that, and I think what mirrors research is that online learning is not a substitute for brick and mortar instruction. And so I know many of you are eager to get back into your classes and your schools. But of course, as the governor says, the economy, the disease is very complex, as is the budget. And so, we are glad that everyone has patience and is just rolling up their sleeves, implementing their continuity of learning plans. Both Susie and the New York City DOE and myself are partnering to collect some additional information from charter schools so that we can, one, continue our monitoring and oversight, but also help tell the story about what charter schools are doing to serve the students that are enrolled in your schools across the state. And so there'll be some more information coming from us potentially later this week. I know many of you probably received a memo from SED about some additional requirements that did not apply to charter schools. It was pulled back. They didn't run it by me first, but you're going to get authorizer specific shortly. Also, yesterday, the State Education Department issued additional guidance regarding the provision of services for students with disabilities. So if you didn't read that yet, we would encourage you to do so. And I think the overarching theme of that guidance is that there's a new normal for students with disabilities as well. And the State Education Department expects you as schools of the LEA for the purposes of special education and the direct service provider for your students with disabilities to provide them with the best services you can, partnering with your districts, and that we expect that that district schools will use, or the CSE and districts will use all of the innovations and resources available to them to provide continuity of learning. But we would ask that you take an inventory of who are the students that you're not able to reach right now. Are they students with disabilities? Are they English language learners? And how can you use the extensive autonomies that are granted charter schools, even during these uncertain times, to best serve those students and to reach students who you haven't been able to reach? How are you tracking attendance? How are you tracking engagement? And how can you do a better job as a charter school, but also as an organization that's serving at-risk children here in the state of New York? We also, you might have seen that New York City came out with grading policies that they are going to implement for district schools. And I would just reiterate, similar to guidelines on closing, you are an independent LEA and you do not need to follow what your districts are doing, whether that's New York City or anywhere else in the state. We do expect you to think outside the box, to adhere to your grading policies, but to think about how your policy can complement your charter, the work that you're doing with your continuity of learning plans, and create a meaningful system of accountability for your students and staff that also helps promote learning and recognizes the work that students are putting into keeping up with proficiency, and particularly in ELA and math, as well as other subject areas. Two last things. On May 11th, we are having a conversation with our school, with Board of Regents authorized schools on renewal. So those schools that are up for renewal next academic year, where we're going to be having a conversation with you to continue our previous conversations, but we're going to send out an email asking for some questions so that we can frame that conversation. And then lastly, I think just musing on something that I've seen, with a lot of people home, it's very easy for boards, for your school boards, to become very involved in the work that you're doing as school leaders. And I know that we also have a lot of board chairs and board members on these calls. Now more than ever, we need strong leadership, and leadership takes many different roles. For boards, it's a governance role. And you need to go back and think about what that means for your school. What are the effective practices around that? But a best practice in terms of a board is not running your school. You hire very, hopefully capable people to do that. You pay them money to do so. And we've seen a lot of blurring lines between governance and management. And we don't think that that's good. That wasn't good before. And we also similarly don't think that it's in the best interest of students and the schools now. So we would encourage you to, during these times, now that people are home, I know a lot of people are working from home, but this might be a good time for continued professional development around board governance. And it also might be a time for you to check in with your authorizer to make sure that your understanding of the role of the board matches what you're actually doing and implementing into practice. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, David. Erin, do you have an update?
Yes, the only update we have today is one that David actually mentioned, and which many of you may have seen, and that is that the DOE's grading policy has been released. We know some folks have been asking for that, and we'll be sharing the link in the C Weekly this list. It's also available on the Info Hub, but you may need to use your DOE credentials to access it. As David did share, charters, including New York City DOE authorized charters, are of course free to choose how, if at all, to consider that policy when developing or refining their own policies. We do know that one of the next questions coming up is related to how this grading policy will impact the middle and high school admissions processes. Those conversations are ongoing, so we will share more on those as those details are finalized. And that is my update.
Okay, great, thank you. Susie, you have an update? Hello.
I failed at unmute. There's always one. My apologies. Hi, everyone. Wanted to underscore that the authorizers have worked together and there will be a survey coming. You'll get the survey is coming emails from us to drive the response rates. We're hoping to keep it manageable and not overly problematic. There's a little bit of conversation earlier this week about potentially some others, and we're trying to focus everyone on one survey. So in addition to that, the Institute, as I had said a couple weeks ago, is also planning for our schools a couple of more one more set of follow-up interview calls. Again, that was just thrilling from our team to hear the work that you're doing and just have that moment to connect. So thank you. We're going to use, at SUNY, we're going to use that data to not only capture the growth in all of the work that you've done since this started in March, but also to be able to capture and push out the data and evidence of your success while we have been working remotely. And I think the last piece I just want to underscore is the Institute folks who have had reach outs from schools and some of the networks to think through some of the reopening considerations whenever that may come about. How to think about it, staggered start, what are the kinds of pieces and parts that the schools will be potentially responsible for having in place before you can kind of safely open and hit all of the items on the governor's checklist that David spoke about. So we are available at any time to have that conversation with you. Oh, and we as well, if you are one of the SUNY authorized charters that's up for renewal next year, you'll be hearing from us before the end of the week. We're gonna have a little meeting and gathering to kind of talk about how we're gonna roll that out and have you make us smarter so we do it in the best way possible. That's all I have.
All right, well, that was great. Thank you, Susie. Now we have a couple of questions we received before taking questions from the Q&A. We'll do our previously received questions first. The first question is regarding students who have newly enrolled in a charter school after schools have been closed since March 16th. Some schools are reporting that parents sought them out after hearing they were offering distance learning at a time when the district schools were not. Regardless of the reason, can each of you, for the selection of the charter schools, can you each speak to your guidance about how to treat, for purposes of district billing in particular, how to treat students who are enrolled during the closure?
As far as we know, there was no waiver of any rule allowing charter schools to continue to enroll students. So if students are eligible for enrollment in your school and you're not, and you're following your charter, and for Board of Regents authorized charter schools, you're not above your authorized enrollment, then we don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to enroll a student. And if you're providing an educational service to that student, then we would not see any reason why you couldn't bill for that student. Of course, we hope that the student will stay with you even after you go back to brick and mortar instruction, but certainly we think that that's a testament to the great work that charter schools are doing across the state right now. And unfortunately, in many districts, particularly upstate, some of the only direct instruction happening is in the charter school sector, even now, which I think is not a very good sign.
I would just also add that I think we've talked from the beginning about keeping as much data and information as you possibly can. And so we found that there was some variation in how schools were counting attendance, et cetera, especially for new students. I would want to make sure that I have a clear explanation should someone ask for it about how when we enrolled that student, keeping data about that student's interaction, whether it was synchronistic or asynchronistic, so that if anyone asks questions about that enrollment, you've got lots of data to show them.
And
okay,
just chiming in from the DOE side, ATS is open for enrollment operations. So if you are trying to make some kind of admission or discharge and you're having trouble, please reach out to our office and we can support. Folks in district schools are working remotely as well, and so there may be time challenges with normal operations. And then we know that FTE calculations for new students will be provided after we get guidance from SED. So continuing enrolling and discharging students in ATS, let us know if you're having trouble, and look for more guidance about new student FTEs.
And Yumika, if I could just jump in here, absolutely not as an authorizer. No one has previewed or approved my unsolicited input here. The one thing that I would add as a non-authorizer piece of guidance is that if your school makes a habit of having any sort of student or family onboarding activity, whether that's collecting paperwork or talking about the mission and culture of the school, to ensure that that happens and that is documented as well, because the ability, I think, of the school to demonstrate that to the largest extent possible, the same process is being followed, and then whatever attendance processes are going on for all of their students are also true for the newly enrolled student. I think that would really ensure that schools would be in good stead as Susie mentioned, if any questions were subsequently asked.
All right, thank you. Now we will move to the questions received. I know there are some in the Q&A, but there's also one in the chat. So Anna, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Absolutely. And so I'm going to focus on ones that are statewide and then leave the DOE questions in particular around technology and construction, which I know are, I think Anjali probably dreams about. So I'll leave those to the DOE portion of the conversation. So David, there is a question here about CSP that's, and I think it's probably just worth asking the question about CSP broadly, the degree to which you can give updates about the status of folks who are expecting awards from prior years, as well as the sort of new tranche of money, if you will.
Sure. So for those schools that are waiting for a CSP award, we are still working very closely with our partners in the comptroller's office, as well as internal stakeholders at SED. We just got over a significant milestone with the comptroller's office yesterday. And so now we're moving ahead with those, and we appreciate people bearing with us. But as you know, it's a very large amount of money for each subgrant. It's actually now $1.25 million. And so you can imagine that there's a significant amount of oversight over the disbursement of those funds. And so the increase in award comes with an increase of responsibility. And so that's the delay in terms of those schools expecting money. In terms of our request for a waiver to the US DOE, we submitted that waiver request about a week and a half ago. We received feedback from the US DOE on Friday. They came back and they asked us about 60 different questions about our proposed waiver. We're in the process of responding to each one. It's very time consuming, but we are moving ahead with that, and we expect to have that resubmission back to them probably tomorrow or the next day. And then we are also similarly waiting for approval for a technical assistance RFP that we received grant funding for from the feds, as well as an RFP for schools that might have expanded after October of 2018. So these are schools that maybe were an elementary school and now they're an elementary and middle school as approved by their authorizer, and we're just waiting for approval of that RFP as well. Unlike new schools, the expansion money is competitive, so there will be an RFP process and schools will have to apply. So
and that will be something that you will announce subsequently, and there will be a separate process for that outside of previously awarded funds that folks might be planning to expect?
Yes, and that there will be an announcement. It will be very public, and we're really excited that that we were able to get that pot of money. Not many other states have it, and the reason we have that money is because the US DOE recognized the high quality of authorizing here in the state, and this COVID-19 wasn't the start of our strong collaboration with our other authorizers. Rather, Susie and I don't know if you remember, Susie, but we met at the Algonquin Hotel about 2.5, 3 years ago to talk about how we're going to move forward, and sort of our own little round table. Only Dorothy Parker was missing. So yeah, so we'll get that out as soon as we can.
Thank you so much, David. And I'm gonna, this question hasn't come up in the chat, but I am gonna come back to you. So I'm gonna give you some think time. Something that I learned working for a charter school about the recent amount of money that was released by Secretary DeVos to states, for states to apply for. The question being, will New York apply? And if so, if you have any crystal ball moments about whether or not charters will ultimately be able to benefit from it.
Oh, I can answer that now if you want.
Oh, great.
Yeah, ready to go. The reason why I can answer, the reason I can answer it now is, yes, New York State plans to apply. It's going through the governor's office. And no, I have no details as to whether, I have no details as to how much money charters will get. There's two big pots of money. One will be based on your title application, and then the other is at the discretion of the governor, and that hasn't been released yet, or the decision on how that will be released hasn't been determined.
Well, thank you for that, Johnny on the spot. We'll look forward to meeting virtually with you and Susie in the Algonquin and brainstorming about how to make sure these great schools that are listening in right now are able to benefit from those funds. So now I'm going to ask a broad authorizer question of David, Susie, and Aaron all together, combining a couple of questions we received in the chat around accountability plan progress report status. And so I'm going to globalize that and say, in light of the fact that there will be no state test scores from the 1920 school year, any thoughts, updates about the way that data is reported to authorizers? And then I think we're probably going to touch back on this pretty regularly. Any preview thinking about communication to schools that would be up for renewal, in particular in the 2021 school year. So anyone who wants to jump in and field that first is welcome to.
I'm happy to talk about ours. So we are looking at the accountability plan reporting guidance. In fact, we spent some time with it today, trying to determine what pieces in it are not on point for folks to complete for next year or looking back to this year, as well as wanting again to provide an opportunity, but not a burden. I know it's a burden, but provide an opportunity for schools to talk about what opportunities they created in this period of time. And so we're capturing some of that information, but want to make sure that you have an opportunity to also make sure we don't miss out those things that you prioritize. We also are likely to consider adding things that we know you're thinking about now, describing any adjustments to promotion policies, kind of end of year grade promotion decisions, etc. Some opportunity to let us know your thinking. And our goal, I should say target, is probably not until the middle of May to get that out to you, maybe later in May, for everyone's accountability progress report. So if my team is listening online, don't be gasping for air with all of the fire hose of things that they're preparing, because they really are looking at this every day. So we're trying to get it to you sooner rather than later. As I indicated, we're gonna roll out our renewal plans to the schools that are up for renewal next year. You'll hear from us later this week. It's going to be pretty short time frame in terms of having the initial conversation, and then the reality of planning for just the process of renewal next year is that there are a number of unknowns, and my pesky crystal ball is still not working very effectively. So we want to figure out a way that we're going to create some partnerships so that if we have to pivot again in terms of gathering any of the data that we always use for renewal, we can do that in the least disruptive way possible for you next year. So that's the SUNY update.
Thanks, David. Erin?
So we are still actively looking at this question. And I think as I shared last time, our path forward, we will likely be sharing in the next month or two, just transparently, helping folks manage expectations. I think if you are one of the schools that is going through renewal next year and you have specific concerns, definitely reach out to us, and we are going to be reaching out to folks on an ongoing basis. But that is the timeline that we are looking at.
We've pretty consistently said that we believe that our performance framework is robust enough to allow us to evaluate schools even during the current crisis. And of course, that doesn't mean that we're going to weigh everything the same way that we did before, but we're fortunate that we have longitudinal data. So even with a missing year, that's still something that we'll be taking into account. But certainly for our schools, benchmark 2 and 3, which is teaching and learning, school culture and climate, take on an added importance now. And so similar to SUNY, we'll be looking at some of that supplementary information that we have been collecting through your continuity of learning plans, but also that we are going to be collecting through our authorizer partnership. We're still pursuing monitoring of charter schools, and we have our remote monitoring protocol that's up on our website that a number of people provided feedback for during our public comment period. And now's the time for you to collect the evidence, as Susie said before, and to make an argument to demonstrate how you're providing supports to the at-risk students that are enrolled in your school, whether they're students with disabilities, English language learners, economically disadvantaged students. And so we want you to be able to tell your own narrative. So we think that most of our accountability, although unfortunately it will be remote, will look very similar to our accountability prior to the COVID-19 crisis.
Great, thanks everyone. So now I'm going to put Yamika on the spot, as again, not an authorizer, to ask a couple of really good questions that have come through the Q&A that are largely about future policy considerations and advocacy. So in particular, about making sure that charters have access to and consideration in any decision making around things like safety equipment, so masks, gloves, sanitizing material, things like that. And then also similar sort of policy considerations on things like attendance waivers, seat time requirements, things like that. So Yumika, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, and certainly David, Susie, and Aaron, you should also all feel free to weigh in. But I know that this is something that authorizers are also deeply invested in and potentially don't have information about. So Yumika, could you say a little bit about what you think are the next steps in decision-making process for those things at a state level?
Well, I'll start with what we should be doing then to inform that process. Schools should start to be thinking about all of those things. What do you need? Masks, gloves, PPE. What do you need in terms of attendance requirements, the things that we've talked about all along, but in thinking about reopening, what do we need to do? So schools should start thinking about that. They should reach out to us, the authorizers, ask those good questions to provide feedback when you're asked information for what resources, what kind of things you should be thinking about, et cetera. In terms of rolling that up to the state level, the governor has announced his New York reopens or unpause advisory board. That's the exact group that we need to be targeting to say, here's what charter schools are going to need to open. The good news is that school districts, most anything that would apply in terms of PPE and seat time, et cetera, will be questions that the districts will ask as well. So it's very likely the states will be looking at those things. Our part for advocacy is knowing what our schools need, knowing what our students need, and reaching out to those folks. So we will certainly be taking that up.
Great, thanks for letting me put you on the spot there. So Corey, Aaron, and Anjali, I think it's about time to turn it over to you all and some DOE-specific questions and topics.
Great, thank you, Anna. All right, so Anjali, I just wanted to start. I know it started at the beginning with a comment about the billing cycle, and May 1st is on Friday. Could you give an update specific for New York City, charter schools located in New York City, about the last per pupil payment of the year?
Yes, for sure. Hi, Corey, and hi, everyone. There's a lot of noise in the background, so sorry if you hear that. And Corey, let me know if at any point I get cut off.
Sounds good.
So payment cycle 6 has actually gone really well. We got confirmation that all of the steps in our internal processing, along with the city level processing, has been completed. And so a lot of schools have received their payment already, and those who haven't will definitely receive them by Friday. If you do not receive your payment by Friday, please reach out to us on Monday and we'll follow up.
Well, that's good news. Thank you. I'm sure all the New York City charter schools on the line were happy to hear that.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, Corey, I want to take an opportunity again to thank schools for all the hard work that went into completing the invoice and give my team a shout out. We literally worked around the clock to get that done in a shortened timeline. So thank you, everyone.
Great. And thank you to you and your team for sure. Moving on, questions that have come up on the chat and have been coming into the Charter Center about construction, particularly in co-located spaces. I know this is something we've touched on before. Any updates for schools in co-located spaces that are needing to do some construction work basically now before the beginning of next school year?
Yes, so we are working with our office who manages that work. We are gonna send some guidance in the C-Weekly this Thursday, so keep an eye out for that. We're also going to have a question and answer. We're working to figure out the details of that for sometime next week.
Okay, great. Since we're on facilities, I think a lot of the New York City charter schools saw the request went out from your office for leases to be submitted, so you guys can start processing the lease payments that come, the big first of which would come with the first per pupil payment in July. the date I believe you put on this was May 1st. Anything that schools should do if they are concerned with or haven't been able to get the leases that where they needed them to be because of COVID-19?
Yeah, for sure. So, so that's the first thing, Corey, that I want to confirm is that that's correct. So we sent out our lease assistance survey, and that's due on May 1st. If there are any issues that come up, or if you're experiencing any issues related to COVID, please reach out to Jen. Jen is managing this work stream. And you know, you're probably familiar with her. I'll put her email in the chat so that you have it. We will certainly work with you if you have delays past the 1st, but essentially we're working to get you all paid on time for payment cycle 1, which is due to schools on July 1st. So definitely do not, you know, we don't have a ton of flexibility past the 1st, but we'll partner with you to figure out next steps.
Okay, great. Next up, the special education hours. I think schools have been reaching out because they noticed that there wasn't one on the calendar for this coming week. Or is the NYC DOE and CSC team still going to be holding those, or how should schools access you guys if they have questions about special education?
For sure. So 2 quick updates. So we are not holding special education office hours this Thursday. However, we'll start again the following Thursday, and we're shifting to having those office hours every 2 weeks. Of course, if anything if a burning question comes up in an off week where we don't have office hours, please send us an email, and we'll make sure to follow up.
On the special education front, there was a question about Zoom usage. Apparently Zoom has released a security update, and just any question if that, I assume the question is, does that meet the security requirements that DOE would require such that charters could go back to using Zoom for students with disabilities that are receiving services by a DOE related provider?
Yeah, so we've received a few emails on this already today. I don't have an answer yet, but we are looking into this.
The other question that I've seen in the chat and that we've been seeing at the center is regarding the DOE's device lending program, which I think first question is there a deadline for when parents must put in a request if they need a DOE lending device? And then I think the second question is, I know that you've made it clear in Charter Weekly and on these webinars that who is able to access these are charter school students that are in the shelter system and/or are students receiving services from DOE related providers for special education. But just curious if you have any advice you can give to schools as they are hearing from families that they're being rejected for getting these devices.
Yeah, for sure. So the first thing, Corey, just to go in order. So there is no deadline. I just received that confirmation. There's no deadline to submit the survey at the moment. However, I'm imagining that at some point there will be. So I will keep you informed when that happens. The second thing I want to address is just a clarification on the groups of students that are eligible. So students with IEPs receiving services from the DOE, as well as students in shelters, students in foster care, and students in temporary housing, including students that are doubled up, are eligible to apply. And so wanted to clarify that first. If a family has received an email saying they're not eligible, however, they believe that they fit in one of the categories that I just mentioned, in the email that they receive, it does request that they resubmit the survey outlining why they believe they're eligible. And in cases in which our office is needed, we are, they reach out to us for clarification. That's the first thing. However, if you hear from parents that they're still having trouble even after resubmission, please reach out to us. I put our email in the chat, but just to say it out loud, you can reach us at charterschools@schools.nyc.gov, and we're happy to work with our device lending program team to do follow-up.
Great. I think that covers all the questions that I've seen come in, unless Anjali, you have anything else you want to add?
Let me take a look at my list super quickly. Hold on. Nope, I think that covers everything, Corey. Thank you.
Okay, great. We'll turn it back to you, Yomika.
All right, thank you both. Before we close, I want to make sure as well, David and Susie, if you have any other comments before we start to wrap up.
Apologies. I don't know why I'm so bad at this today, but it's true. There was a question that popped up about looking at disbursement of families as school returns next fall. It's something I am super interested in, both what happens, what are the kind of enrollment patterns in the fall for students, but also for staff. I am fascinated by what the effects may be on all of you and the students' families, and what we might need to do to be supportive of them. So that is kind of a little bit farther down in the works, at least in my thinking, about a follow-up survey to the one that we talked about coming out in a couple weeks, and is to understand how things are rolling out again in the fall. So contact me if you have interesting questions or insight for us as we're trying to design a little bit of more knowledge gathering in the fall. Would really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. With that said, we're going to wrap up. I do want to just add one more note. We got questions about the PPE, and we got for schools, as well as questions about consortium regionally. We are rolling, or we will be rolling out information on PPE that might be available through one of our partner programs, so look out for that. We'll send that email out shortly with the details on the potential opportunity to get access to that for our schools. Panelists, thank you again for taking your time to join these webinars. Always, always much appreciated. We look forward to talking to you again next week. As a reminder for everyone, on Thursday we will do a deep dive with Underdog to discuss digital student recruitment and enrollment. In the meantime, thank you and stay safe.
Thank you, everybody. Be well.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Take
Bye.
care.
Thank you.